In the kingdom of Zalu, there was a boy who would change its story and be forgotten in its history. His name was Chidi. Chidi was a growing youth that lived with his widowed mother in Zalu. He was known for his wits and mischievous ways, but more than that, Chidi was noted for speaking an abomination in Zalu. In Zalu, it was forbidden to speak of the outside world. Not only was it forbidden, but no one seemed to know what existed beyond the walls. The myths and legends from the ancient scrolls were all from Zalu. Even the gods they revered originated from Zalu. From birth, Chidi had dreamed of leaving Zalu. When other children spoke of what they desired to become, Chidi always stayed mute. If he was pressured or forced to speak, he responded with no excitement, and he always said he wanted to leave Zalu. As Chidi grew, his desire to leave Zalu grew with him. When he finally became a young man, he spent his days and nights crafting strategies on escaping the gate. It was the reason he was always found at the gate. One day, Chidi set out to the gate. He tiptoed to observe its width and length. He made notes of possible places he could break with metal to aid his escape. On his way back, one of his neighbors ran to meet him. She said it was an emergency. His mother was missing. Chidi's heartbeat raced. He knew he was supposed to have helped her with carrying the calabash from the river. The river was miles away. The neighbor stood by him and was frightened. He told her to go, that he would find her. Chidi felt a tight sensation in his chest. It became almost painful. He started to run towards the river, but stopped when the pain gripped him harder. Chidi held his breath and closed his eyes. He saw a vision. It was his mother. She was slowly fetching water at the river. No one was there. She tried to carry the calabash once it was full, but her leg pressed too hard on the muddy ground, and she slipped into the river. Chidi knew his mother could not swim. She started screaming and gasping for help, but nobody was around. The vision was so real, and Chidi wanted so badly to save his mother. Chidi ran towards the river. There he saw his mother coming towards him with a calabash on her head. She was dripping wet. When she saw him, she smiled softly and coughed out a lot of water. Chidi took her home and laid her to rest. He lit the firewood to keep them and the hut warm. The next morning, Chidi asked his mother, and she told him what had happened. She had tried to carry her water calabash when she tripped and fell into the river. She screamed until someone had helped her out. When Chidi asked who, she said she could not remember his face, only that he dragged her out. Chidi sat in silence and thought. Days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months. Chidi planned his next escape out of Zalu. He had paid the neighbor a good amount of cowries to take care of his mother. That night, as he sharpened his knife, he felt a strange sensation in his chest again, like something was pricking him. Chidi knew the feeling was similar. It reminded him of the night his mother was drowning. He closed his eyes and was taken into a trance. He saw a little girl screaming. Apparently, she had seen a snake and it was heading for her. Chidi tried to reach her, just like he had done for his mother. He got to her just in time and killed the snake. After killing the snake, he regained himself. He was back to sharpening his knife. Chidi slept very early that night. When he woke up, news had gone round Zalu that a woman's daughter was saved from a snake attack by a stranger she couldn't remember. After hearing that, Chidi went to meet Zalu's most powerful diviner in the middle east of Zalu. The journey took him 12 hours. It was a hut almost estranged from the rest of the city. Once he got in, he clapped 4 times to indicate he had brought a serious issue. The old diviner, Baba Tintu, came out in his shaggy and faded wrapper. Stricken with years, he made very slow movements to the stool at the center. Once he sat, Chidi began to narrate his experience. When he was done speaking, the old man sat in silence for a while and stretched out his hand. Chidi placed a small parcel of curry on his hand. Baba Tintu weighed it and nodded. He started to make strange sounds and threw beads on the ground. When he was done with his ritual, He spoke. Chidi's powers were ancestral. They belonged to those in his bloodline. Baba Tintu said that was all he could hear. Chidi looked at the old man in shock. At home, he asked his mother about his powers. With a solemn look, she slowly answered Chidi. His father had possessed the ability. It caused him to see visions of people in danger. He claimed that he could feel and even touch the people in his vision, but it was never confirmed. One day, he suddenly collapsed and died. A cutting-edge silence filled the room as she spoke. When she was done, Chidi retired to bed. Chidi kept his ability a secret from those who knew him, but that did not stop the visions from coming. He saved many lives in the village and was not remembered. The reality of the aftermath of his gift stung, and it fueled his desire to leave Zalu. One day, an alarm was raised. The guards had caught an intruder around the gates. When the intruder was brought forward, it was Chidi. Chidi gave no explanations because he knew he was at fault. He was marched up to the king's dungeon. There he spent 3 days and was given food that was befitting of rats. When Chidi came out, the Prince of Zalu approached him. Prince Tawa was known as the pride of Zalu. His exceptional ability on the battlefield, his looks and wits earned him the title. Many adored him. When Chidi stood in front of him, he could sense the aura of kingship and royalty. Prince Tawa, alongside his guards, accompanied Chidi to the inner courts of the palace. As they crossed the perfectly sculptured images of the gods of Zalu, Prince Tawa bursted into laughter. Chidi was amazed at what the Prince of Zalu found funny. Prince Tawa confessed. He told Chidi he had admired him. He, in awe of his boldness to dare to cross the borders of Zalu. Chidi kept silent but stared intently at the prince. The prince offered him a proposal. He said he had a plan to escape Zalu. He only wanted to know if Chidi would join him. Chidi assumed it was a trap. He asked the prince why he desired to leave Zalu. Tawa said he wanted to see the world. As he spoke of his dreams, Chidi found himself strangely drawn to his reasons. He saw a reflection of himself in the prince. He agreed. The next night, he met up with Prince Tawa to discuss their plan. With him came Princess Tuchi. The plan was simple. Princess Tuchi would fall very ill. The prince had already spoken with Baba Tintu and paid him a lot of money for a mixture that would make her sick for a while. The king would raise an alarm and everyone would speculate a cure for her. Everyone in Zalu knew the king treasured Prince Tawa's opinions more than his counsel, so Tawa would suggest going beyond the walls to search for a cure. The king would agree and Tawa would leave with Chidi, disguised as a soldier, and 2 of his trusted men. The plan sounded good, but Chidi was still cautious. He knew some things did not always go according to plan. The night of Princess Tuchi's birthday, as the wooden drum resounded in the air, the princess made her entrance. As she approached the center of the grounds, right in front of the king, the prince, members of the council, and the whole village, she slumped. The air became tensed and the king ran to his daughter's side. The news spread like wildfire the next day. Princess Tuchi was severely sick. The king of Zalu was perturbed. It was no news that the queen died, giving birth to Tuchi. She was a treasured child that reminded him more than Tawa of his lovely wife. To the king, losing her was losing his heart. He called for a council meeting as Tawa had anticipated. In the meeting, Prince Tawa remained silent until the last elder had given his suggestion. He stood up to speak when the king had raised his staff over him, indicating his blessing to speak. Prince Tawa tore the beads on his neck as an entrance act. He spoke as a man who was losing all he had. He put down all the other suggestions and said his. The only cure for Tuchi was beyond the walls. Silence rested in the court as he ended his statement. The king remained quiet. He adjourned his decision until the next week. Chidi waited in expectancy for the prince's report. The week was almost over and he was experiencing more visions. The last one was an old woman. But something strange happened after he broke the old woman's fall. She told him thank you and warned about the dangers of the journey he would embark on. She said it would end in pain. When Chidi regained consciousness, he tried to find the old woman, but he never did. The next morning arrived, and the king gave his verdict. Prince Tawa was to leave to retrieve a cure for Princess Tuchi. Chidi felt excited but also had a mixed feeling. Leaving Zalu had always been his dream, but now he was uncertain of what to expect. They left Zalu early the next day, accompanied by the trusted guards of Tawa, Jumbo, and Zinga. The two men began their journey to the world beyond. The lands were dry and sand waves filled the air as they walked. Compared to Zalu's richness, the outside world felt empty and starved. But Chidi with the rest of the men held their hopes high. A day turned to days, and slowly the days were approaching a week. The men had not seen a village or sign of life close by. They spent their nights in caves or crevices on the ground. Slowly, their water and food supplies were waning, and Chidi panicked. Doubts evaded his mind as to if there was really anything beyond Zalu. The dryness became worse and the sandstorms grew heavier. Even breathing was a problem. By the days they had stopped counting, Chidi, Tawa, Jumbo, and Zinga were on last strength. They fell to the ground, Tawa falling down first and Chidi last. Chidi closed his eyes slowly. He gave his last breath and felt the weight of his body meet the hardened earth. He saw something, but not with his eyes open. It was a vision, and what he saw amazed him. Tawa, Jumbo, and Zinga were on the ground, and beside them was him. He saw a vision of himself in the present. As he looked further, he saw a woman carrying a sack on her head. Chidi ran to her. He knew she may not remember him afterwards, but he told her to help them. When Chidi woke up, she felt the dampness of a wet cloth on his head. He jerked up and felt a rough but careful hand hold him back. His eyes scanned the room until he saw a familiar face. It was Tawa. He looked happier than the prince who was choking on sand. Prince Tawa walked up to him and told him what happened. They were at the border of Sangru when the sandstorms happened. The woman that saved them was the princess of Sangru. She had come to get the sand of the storm for an ancient ritual. Her name was Princess Kiki. She said someone or something had told her to go a bit further from where she was originally at. Chidi knew it was his vision. Princess Kiki was revered in Sangru. She was treated like a goddess among the people because of her beauty. She also performed some priestess duties as part of her roles in Sangru. Now she had helped Chidi and Tawa to a nearby healer's place. Tawa voiced his desire to see the beautiful princess and thank her in person. Chidi felt the weight of desire behind his words. They left the healer's place and paid for an inn with some of the coins they had. Since the coins were from Zalu, the innkeeper looked at them strangely but made no remarks. He simply ushered them to one of his huts and gave them the meal they paid for. Chidi spent the whole night replaying the almost death experience and how his powers had evolved. He was curious to know what more he could do with his abilities. He also thought of his mother and life back at Zalu, but somewhere inside, he found greater joy in exploring Sangru. While Prince Tawa went to learn the language and customs of Sangru, Chidi spent the next few days roaming free and taking in the air that seemed so different from what he knew. He ate their native food and participated in most of their festivals. Chidi had not experienced a vision in a while. It made him a bit surprised, but he was equally grateful for the peace of not seeing others in pain. One night, as he slept, he saw a vision. A young woman was surrounded by a group of men. They looked like they were ready to harm her. Chidi sprang into action and fought the men. When he was done, he waited to leave the vision, but he couldn't jump out. The young woman in question thanked him. She was equally beautiful like the princess. She asked his name and where he was from. Chidi only told her his name, and once he was dead, he left the vision. The morning sun came up and heavy-bodied men slammed their doors the next day. Prince Tawa had sent Jumbo and Zinga on an errand, so it was just him and Chidi. The men seized them and took them to the king's council. When they brought it in, some men made accusations on Prince Tawa. They said he had tried to make attempts on their beloved princess. Prince Tawa defended himself, saying he had only seen the princess some days ago and spoken with her. Princess Kiki was sent for, and when she came, she affirmed Prince Tawa did not hurt her, but only spoke with her. Chidi felt his stomach growl from hunger and tension. He knew Prince Tawa had been secretly meeting the princess. He also knew the prince had admitted to liking her. What he was unsure of was the traditions of this land. In Zalu, a man could not see his betrothed so closely until he had performed 8 of 16 rituals. The king of Sangru gave his verdict. Chidi and Prince Tawa would serve time in the palace walls until he was certain they were not a threat to his daughter. The two men were escorted by the guards to an old hut. Their brilliantly colored wrappers were changed to sackcloths. Manual labor within and beyond the palace walls became their daily bread. Chidi felt no unnecessary strain working because all his life he had performed such roles. The prince, on the other hand, was torn into two. His hands trembled as he carried the animal dung. The only thing that kept him sane was his ability to see Princess Kiki up close. One day, as they returned to their quarters in the palace, the prince left to wash up in the well and Chidi headed back alone. A little boy, a servant of a maid, ran to meet him. He carried a small scroll. He asked Chidi to help him read it. Since Chidi had watched Prince Tawa practice their language a few times, he had a faint idea of it. He took the scroll and stared at it for a long time. When he couldn't remember, he asked the young boy to come back and see Prince Tawa the next day. Something couldn't leave Chidi's mind as he waited for Prince Tawa's return that night. It was the image on the boy's scroll. It showed two kingdoms far apart each other. The first had Sangru scribbled under it and the other had Za, but Za was surrounded by spears. If he tried to interpret what he saw, it meant Za would be conquered. Chidi's thoughts were interrupted by the rush of Prince Tawa inside. The prince beamed his teeth and told Chidi of his plan to escape and head back to Zalu. He said he had found a bride in this distant land. Chidi asked who, and Tawa said whom Chidi had not expected to hear. Princess Kiki. He said the princess had agreed to marry him after he revealed who he really was and where he came from. Chidi stood in silence. Prince Tawa had just exposed their identities in the name of love. Tawa told Chidi that he would head back to Zalu and speak with his father. He was certain Princess Tuchi would have recovered from the fake medicines given to her. When he asked if Chidi would join him, Chidi said no, stating he was not ready to return to Zalu yet. The prince escaped the next day with Jumbo and Zinga. Chidi resumed his duties around the palace grounds. He noticed Sangru's festivals slowly reduce. The liveliness the village had was no longer felt. He thought he was imagining it. One night, as he fetched water from the well, a palace maiden came to do so. He helped her fetch, and as she said thank you, Chidi sensed a feeling of familiarity. He turned to see her and noticed she was the same young woman in the vision he had some nights ago. She said nothing to him and walked away. Some days later, Chidi discovered she worked as a servant of Princess Kiki. With no one else to speak with, Chidi spent most of his days learning the ancient language and traditions of Sangru. It was in learning he encountered the servant girl again, and this time, with a stronger urge to speak with her, he asked her her name. Her name was Susa. From that day on, Susa began to speak with Chidi. What started as a friendship was slowly blossoming into affection. One night, Chidi fell critically ill and Susa came to tend to him. She helped him cool his temperature with a warm cloth. and gave him medicine to drink. To make him sleep, she told him stories of her past, the life she had lived before she met the princess, how being an orphan because of war cost her her dignity and home. Chidi felt touched, and slowly, under her touch, he fell asleep. With his eyes closed, Chidi saw a vision. It was Prince Tawa. He walked the dry lands with Jumbo and Zinga, but behind him was the sound of horses, warriors from a distant land, and they were not smiling. With spears in their hands, they charged towards the prince. Chidi tried to reach them to inform them of the danger very close to them. But for the very first time in his vision, Chidi could not move. The prince heard the sound of horses and turned. The warriors looked familiar. They resembled men from Sangru. Chidi was thrown back into his reality. He opened his eyes and tried to move, but he laid, bound. His legs and hands were tied together by a twine, and he was surrounded by strange-looking women in white cloths. They were making chants. He scanned his environment. He was brought before the king of Sangru, and all the subjects of Sangru sat there as well. They wore strange frowns on their faces. At the center of them was Princess Kiki, the one who saved them and had stolen Prince Tawa's heart. She sat in silence as the king stood up to speak. Sangru revealed their plan. It was said to them by an ancient scroll prophecy of a distant land they were meant to conquer and live in. The scroll said the land was beautiful, bright and colorful. Chidi listened. The scroll also revealed the first two letters of the land as Z and A. So they called it Za and taught their children to seek for it from generation to generation. But after waiting for so long, they had finally found it. To the people of Sangru, the gods had brought Chidi and Tawa to them. They noticed they were strangers after Princess Kiki stated where she had found them. The accusation of the men that led them to stay in Sangru was only an act to take them to the palace. Princess Kiki responded to Tawa to get information from him, and once she confirmed who he was and where he had come from, she knew there was no mistaking it. Za had to be Zalu. They sent warriors to secretly follow Prince Tawa. Chidi's body remained bound. The women continued their chant, and for some reason, Chidi felt weaker. A young woman among them stepped out and poured a liquid on Chidi. He didn't need to see all of her to know who it was. Susa. Susa was a priestess who worked with Princess Kiki. She was also one of the healers that helped them once they got into Sangru. She had immense power and secretly sensed that something was off about Chidi. Her investigation stopped when some men she was owing surrounded her. They tried to beat her. She was saved. And if she did not have strange powers, she would have never remembered. But she did. She remembered his name as Chidi. Princess Kiki knew about it and told her to investigate further. They discovered that Chidi had a special ability that could interfere with their plans, and once he fell sick, Susa used the opportunity to poison him. The poison was born from an ancient ritual that could suppress his powers. Chidi stayed still, listening to them speak of war and describing their deceit and betrayal. He was carried to a dungeon and locked in. With no one to call and no place to run to, Chidi laid on the dampened floors, awaiting his sentence. His mind drifted back to his childhood in Zalu. He wondered about his mother and how her health was. He thought about those he had saved with vision ability, imagined many more he would have saved if he had stayed. His stomach churned at the smell of dead rats and spoiled food. By the fourth day, without food and water and in complete darkness, Chidi fell into a trance. He sat on a chair that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Beside him was another chair. The first person that appeared on the chair was his late father, Mr. Tende. Mr. Tende sent his son a tired smile and patted him lightly on the back. He apologized for leaving him so early in life. Chidi was shocked to see his father, but he felt a tinge of joy at his appearance. Mr. Tende told his son he had come to tell him more about his abilities. He knew no one else could guide him except one who possessed the ability. The ability was called the blood vision, and it was called blood because it only existed in their bloodline. A wielder had the ability to see danger in visions and teleport in time to save the person. The only sad part was those he saved would never remember him. It was a blessing from the gods granted to them to help the king and Zalu's royal bloodline. Mr. Tende paused and his eyes became solemn. He lowered his voice and looked straight into Chidi's eyes. Chidi could sense the fear and tension in his father's eyes. Even after death, the ability was also a curse, because after it had accomplished its purpose, the wielder would die. Chidi gasped, and at that moment, his father disappeared. The chair beside him was vacant until the old lady that prophesied about his journey appeared. She said she was the voice of the gods. Chidi would have to save Zalu from its impending danger. When Chidi asked how, she responded by saying he had to do what only him could do. Chidi regained consciousness and grunted when he opened his eyes. A rat had urinated just beside his body. Sangru was also very quiet. He couldn't hear the footsteps of guards and his hands were still bound. But unsure was the strength he felt after the vision. It was not enough to tie the bound twines, but he could move his body against the walls. He closed his eyes and hoped for a vision. Nothing came in the next 10 minutes. When he almost gave up, Chidi was thrown into another vision. There he saw Prince Tawa with a dagger. Blood dripped from it. Him, Zinga, and Jumbo had fought the men who ambushed them tirelessly. It would have been a victory, but Zinga was bleeding and Jumbo laid lifeless. Prince Tawa was equally exhausted from fighting. Chidi stood still, not knowing what to do. Then something strange happened. He received another vision in the vision. Troops from Sangru, an army that looked like their whole village, was coming towards the path Prince Tawa was on. They needed to run or else he would be killed. Chidi ran towards Tawa and held his hand. Tawa turned and looked at him, but he did say a word. Like deep down, he knew him. They ran and Zinga followed behind, limping as he ran. They did not stop until Chidi was certain they were closer to Zalu than before. They spent one night in a cave and began their journey the next morning. Chidi could not sleep, and he was surprised he had stayed in a vision for that long, but he knew it meant his mission was not over. They continued until they got to Zalu's gate. He got into Zalu and noticed how beautiful it looked. He remembered how much he loved it, the color, the bustle of market women, and the young boys that found joy in fighting with old firewood logs. Chidi took in the view like it was his first time in Zalu, and his father's word reminded him it may be his last. While Prince Tawa and Zinga were accompanied to the palace, he went and found a scroll. He began to write everything he heard, including his abilities. He wrote who he was and the life he had lived. He passed by the neighbor's house and saw his mother sitting by the tree. She was roasting a native delicacy of corn. She smiled when the neighbor spoke with her and looked around like she was waiting for someone. Chidi's heart broke when he saw his mother like that. He wondered what would have been if he stayed and spent more time with her. He rushed to the palace. He noticed he did not have to wait for the doors to be opened. He could slide through the walls, like his ability had reached its peak. He went in Prince Tawa's room, but the prince was not there. He dropped the scroll he had written on. Chidi closed his eyes, waiting to regain his consciousness. But he was alive. That meant he still had time. Chidi ran back to where his mother was. He needed to see her one last time. She was still outside roasting the corn. He walked close to her and tapped her gently. Then he smiled. The moment she looked at him, Chidi disappeared. Prince Tawa had come into his room and read the letter. He rushed to his father the king and informed him of his foolishness. He explained how he faked Princess Tochi's sickness, promising her precious rubies once he was back. He also showed him the letter and said the kingdom of Sangru was approaching. The king stared at his son like a man who already knew the story. He commanded the armies of Zalu to charge on ahead for war. Some diviners left with them for healing and counterattack if the spiritual was summoned. Prince Tawa had never seen his father so calm about anything, let alone a war. He sat on his throne like he had already won. Few days later, the army of Zalu returned with a victory chant. They had destroyed Sangru and their king. The king of Zalu called his son and confessed to having known he lied. He investigated and Princess Tuchi spoke up after some days. She was punished and Babatin to serve time as well. Tawa apologized to his father and headed back to his room. Sorrow filled his heart as to what he had caused, and ever so when he saw Chidi's letter. From that day onward, he remembered the sacrifice that saved his life and set Zalu free.